Hello, I'm Nathan Rubin, and I am here to present my paper, Stronger Bounds for Weak Epsilon-Nets in Higher Dimensions. What is an epsilon-net? Suppose we are given a finite point set in dimension d, and we also have a broadly defined family of geometric sets in the same ambient geometric space. And suppose we are dealing with boxes, these indices of convex sets. And our goal is to find a hopefully small set of points with a property that for every epsilon heavy set from our family of geometric sets, which encompasses at least an epsilon fraction of all the underlying points, we would pierce it by at least one point of our net. Epsilon nets were first introduced into statistical learning theory by Batnik and Chavonenkis, and later on they were introduced into discrete and computational geometry by Hausler and Welser, where they have become one of the cornerstone notions. I would like to mention a strong relation between epsilon nets and selection and type results. Epsilon nets, or rather bounds on epsilon nets, determine the integrality gap of geometric covering and heating problems, which are generally very hard to approximate. And weak epsilon nets were used by Alon and Kleitman to establish the so-called Hadwiger-de Bruner PQ conjecture. And epsilon nets are used to subdivide a collection of simple geometric objects to a small number, polynomial number of more or less regular pieces for future algorithmic divide and conquer. An epsilon net is called strong if its points are drawn from the underlying point distribution, and otherwise it's a weak epsilon net. The famous epsilon net theorem states that if our geometric sets from the underlying family of geometric ranges have a bounded Batnik-Chavonenkis dimension, which happens if they're simply shaped, such as boxes or spheres or half spaces in a fixed dimension, then there is always a strong epsilon net whose cardinality is almost proportional to 1 over epsilon, and it absolutely does not depend on the number of points in the underlying point distribution. And however, if our geometric sets have unbounded description complexity, which happens, for example, for convex set, that then small size strong epsilon nets may not be possible. For example, if our points lie on a circle and we choose a small net, then we can always pick a convex set which would swallow up all of the remaining points while avoiding the points of our net. However, Alon Barani, Furedi, and Kleitman still show that convex there exist bounded size weak epsilon nets with respect to convex sets. And in the previous example, one of the most natural way to obtain such a net is to look at the so-called Radon points, which are of basically intersections of segments containing our points. And in higher dimensions, we may similarly look at generalized Weber points. Unlike the case of strong epsilon nets, the growth rate of weak epsilon nets is very far from being solved. In 92 alone, Barani for AD Kleitman obtained an exponent in dimension D, which is only very slightly better than D plus 1, which was shortly afterwards improved to D. And Matuszek and Wagner established the same exponent using a very elegant argument based on simplicial partitions with a low hyperplane crossing number. And so far, the best known lower bound for weak epsilon nets is only, with respect to convex sets, is only slightly superlinear in 1 over epsilon, where of course 1 over epsilon is the trivial lower bound for strong or weak epsilon nets if our points live on and near-linear constructions are known only for point sets which are essentially one-dimensional, say in convex position in the plane, or if they are uniformly distributed on a sphere, in which case our situation is very close to strong epsilon. So therefore, one of the central open problems in combinatorial and computational geometry is to determine the true growth rate of weak epsilon nets with respect to convex sets. Is it really near-linear in 1 over epsilon, or does our exponent go up with the dimension D? And in my previous paper, I have improved, I have made the first progress towards resolving this question by improving the planar exponent from 2 to roughly 3/2. And in this paper, we further improve the exponent in any dimension D from D to D minus half roughly. And this is the first progress in general dimension D in over 25 years. And it's remarkable that the high dimensional analysis cannot be used to replace the planar one, because though the two bounds look superficially similar, they have very different bottlenecks. The new bound is based on the following fundamental reduction of weak epsilon nets in dimension D to one-dimensional strong delta nets with a suitable fraction delta. To this end, we notice that each convex set of interest to us cuts out a subset of epsilon and points which determine epsilon n choose D minus one dimensional simplices, which comprise only an epsilon D fraction of all the simplices determined by the underlying point set. So we simply seek to stab a fixed fraction of this epsilon n choose D simplices with a single vertical line, and construct a one-dimensional delta net with respect to the intercepts of the simplices with this vertical line. And to this end, we can, of course, project the points of our convex set into the D minus one dimensional space. We project them vertically, and we apply the following second selection theorem, which is a fundamental result, which allows to pierce many simplices in a dense geometric hypergraph with a single point. So we use this result in dimension D minus one and lift it back into a vertical line which has a desired property. However, there are two basic hurdles that we must deal with. First, the line that we so the sketch reduction does not seem to be accurate. So for one, we have chosen a line. So we constructed a delta net, one-dimensional delta net, but the ratio epsilon to the d is too bad, it's too small to obtain an improvement. And also there is the problem that we have chosen our line with knowledge of our convex set, and if we seek to serve all the possible heavy convex set, this is essentially d minus one dimensional, at least as hard as solving d minus one dimensional with Epsilon problem, and we may need many such lines. So our approach to address these obstacles, we follow the following general plan. First, we had to pierce to many simplices in our convex sets without knowing what they are, using only near constant number of lines. And to this end, it's enough to look and this can be achieved provided that the points of our convex sets are well distributed in the one-dimensional projection. And for the rest, we adopt a different recursive approach, and we also seek to improve the effective ratio between the simplices that live within our convex set versus all simplices done by the underlying point set. So we seek to replace the general pool of simplices by something much smaller, and this is possible for at least for convex sets which resemble hyperplanes, and for the rest we follow a more subtle approach. While the first step is exactly the extension in dimension d minus one, the second works in dimension d, and both of them use the following fundamental result from computational geometry, the so-called simplicial partition theorem. So if we have an endpoint set in dimension d, we partition it into almost evenly into R parts, and each part is enclosed by a simplex, and Matuszek showed that there is always such a decomposition with the property that every hyperplane will cross only a small fraction of the enclosing simplices, and this is very essential for geometric divide and conquer. So to solve the first problem to serve our convex sets with only a few vertical lines, we project all the underlying points into dimension d minus one. We construct the simplicial decomposition there, and we say that a convex set is narrow if at least a fixed fraction of its points can be traced in the projection by the minus two dimensional plane, namely the enclosing simplices only will be crossed by this d minus dimensional plane. So these points will be concentrated in a certain thin stripe in dimension d minus two, and otherwise the set is called spread. So narrow sets whose points are concentrated in dimension b minus 2. They can be handled recursively, and they contribute, because of their concentration, they contribute a b minus 1 dimensional recursive term, which does not affect the natural order of magnitude of our construction. And for spread sets, we can serve them using only a small number of vertical lines because the points are well spread. Finally, we improve the bulk of the work is required to improve the effective ratio of the simplices that come from our convex set versus all the simplices. And to this end, we seek to replace the set of general pool of simplices with respect to whose intercepts our one-dimensional nets are constructed, which would automatically improve the overall ratio. And of course, we seek to obtain such a subset, look at a smaller subset of simplices, which for every interesting convex set will still contain a fixed fraction of the simplices that it determines. The task is particularly easy if we deal with hyperplanes, so our convex sets are hyperplanes, in which case for any subset of d points, we can rid of all the remaining points of our convex set because they live in the same hyperplane. And to approximate this property, we construct a simplicial partition now in dimension d, and we say that the set is convex set is tight if for the bulk of d size subsets of its point that come from the same part in the partition. If we look at the supporting hyperplane, one can the bulk of the points of our convex set can be leaving parts that are traced by this hyperplane in the partition. And as you can see on the picture, and if this is not the case, then we say that our set is loose. And naturally, simplices that arise as part of tight sets can be charged to local simplices, d-1 dimensional simplices, which live determined by b tuples coming from the same part of the partition. So because of the charging scheme, we can obtain a nice bound on the number of such simplices that rise as part of tight convex sets. And we throw away the remaining simplices, and this provides for a much better ratio, depending on the way our gain depends on the partition parameter that we employ. Finally, if our sets are loose, so they don't behave like hyperplanes, in which case we can replace the points of our convex sets by the vertices of the surrounding simplices, and So we have a much coarser set of points, a smaller set of simplices that they determine, and altogether this again amounts to a much better ratio in our one-dimensional reduction. And finally, we combine the two bounds, the two constructions for the tight sets and for the loose sets, and we choose the best possible partitioning parameter to interpolate between the two bounds and to obtain the best available recurrence. So to summarize, we have breached a 25-year-old barrier for weak Epsilon-Nets. So we know that in any dimension, the growth rate is not 1 over epsilon to the d. The exponent has to be smaller. And for the progress, may build on and instigate further insights into point line incidences and selection theorems in dimensions, in various dimensions, whether we seek to pierce our simplices by points or by lines or by the flats. And so basically, weak Epsilon-Nets, to address the weak Epsilon-Net problem, we must exploit its relations to these two very fundamental problems within combinatorial and computational geometry. And I would also like to know that the exponent, the present exponent d minus half, is mostly an artifact of our analysis, namely to solve the multiple selection problem. We project our points to dimension d minus 1 and apply, and just because of the d minus 1 dimensional recurrence, this exponent has to be at least d minus 1, and in order to improve it further below d minus 1, one has to solve the multiple selection problem even more efficiently than it is done now. Thank you for attending this talk. Bye.